I talked to my wife earlier this week, which, guys, is normally a smart idea. And I said, actually, this series ought to go like 6 or 8 weeks, and I'm doing it in 4 weeks. So, it's trying to figure out how to land this and where to finish at. And the obvious one is Bathsheba, right? Another one, David's not ups but down moments. But I said, I got this other one that's an up moment, and Lori said, finish on the up one. So we're going to finish on an up one instead of a down one. So that's good news for all of us, right? So let's kind of just do a quick review. For 7 years, things went pretty good for David. He rides the Goliath victory, 15 years old, and until he's 22, things are going great, right? He gets pulled into King Saul's home. He lives there now. He moves up the ranks. He ultimately gets to the spot where he is the commander of Saul's armies. He's actually the chief of his bodyguard. He's like the closest to the king. His fully responsibility. The king trusts him completely. Things are going well. He ends up marrying one of the king's daughters. There's a whole suspense around that. I hope you had a chance to read that this week. But he loves her. She loves him, which isn't always the kind of thing back then. People were put together. He ends up being BFF with the king's son, which causes the king a little frustration and makes him get angrier and angrier as David's popularity grows. Saul gets more and more paranoid, more and more jealous, more and more frustrated. And he goes on, and it's just like, I got to do something. First he thinks I'm going to kill him, and then he thinks, no, that's not a smart move because he's so popular. If I kill him, that won't go good for me. So he sends him out all these crazy assignments to fight the enemy, and he's hoping that he puts him in just a bad situation, that the enemy will do what he hopes will happen. And David comes back victorious every time, to which makes all the ladies go, that's right, yeah. They sing more songs about him. All the guys are like, yeah, what up, David? You're all right. Yeah, you're my guy, right? To which makes Saul just like, right? He just gets more and more frustrated as they go on. So at the end of that 7 years, when David's around 22 years old, this is when we talked about last week, he runs away from Saul because Saul has lost it and is out to kill him now. And he can't stand the jealousy and the paranoia. So David takes off, and literally the next 8 years, as you read the story, are really rough. And as you read the passage there, the narrator telling the story, he's literally running for his life for those 8 years. Never having a place to settle down. He's here. He's hiding in caves. He's camping out over here. He's going back and forth. He ends up, in this 8 years, he ends up losing a wife and adding a bunch of wives. And he loses his wife, kind of crazy, because his father-in-law takes his wife back and gives her to somebody else. Because that's how women were treated back then, I don't like what you're doing, so I'm going to take her away from you. I know she loves you, but too bad for her. I'm going to put her over here. And so David loses his wife that way. He gains a couple other wives through this process. He ends up fighting for the enemy, which seems kind of crazy, but David is just watching his back, trying to figure out how I can survive in this world, because it's him, and I think it's something like 300 or 600, I forget the number, guys that have come out that have, are frustrated with Saul, that have joined his little band of army. He ends up fighting with the enemy. He's kind of back and forth. He fights for the enemy, then he fights with the enemy. And during that 8 years, what you discover is that there's some lessons that he learns throughout that whole running. And if you've ever had that moment in your life when you've run from something, you know that there are some lessons that are hard-earned during that time, and lessons that really can leave a huge impact on us. And these are the lessons I told you back about a couple of weeks ago. Probably the biggest one David learns is this one. And David recognizes pretty quickly that this isn't about him. This is about God has anointed him as king, but that doesn't make him the king, right? He's just the one that God's chosen, and he seems to do a pretty good job most of his life and career when he becomes sort of officially king on handling that. But he also has this other thing that he's learned, and it goes simply like this, that God's will, done God's way in God's time. And it's one recurring theme that he seems to learn and keep practicing over and over during time. This commitment that this is God's will, that God's ultimately in control, that God's sovereign. But it isn't just about this is what God wants done, that we just go ahead and do it. It's also God's way has to happen. And it has to happen in God's time. Which if you're a person of faith, you understand that to some degree. It's one of the things that frustrates us a little bit about this whole thing called faith, right? Because it would seem like it'd be so great, if we knew God's will, we just said, hey, this is what God wants, let's just go do it. But we have to do it in his way, which means in a fair, equitable way, right? And doing it in his time, which, as we've discovered, is not always our time. In fact, it's rarely our time. Because our time is now. That's exactly right. Now. We don't want it 5 minutes from now. We don't want it later today. We want it, right? So let's pick up the story with David. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 24, and this is how the narrator writes it. He says, Saul, was told that David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So we're starting out in the stage that David's running. He's moving from place to place. He gets word, hey, they're out in this desert area. And so Saul takes 3,000 elite soldiers with him. Way more than you should need to capture a guy with a few hundred soldiers. But this is David they're talking about. David, who's the rock star warrior, right? The guy who, makes something out of nothing. And so he begins looking for David and his men near the rocks of the wild mountain goats, which means nothing to us. Apparently meant something to them. And then the narrator says, hey, Saul comes along and he comes to the sheep pens that are beside the road. And apparently it was kind of famous back then where they did the shearing of sheep, and this was the spot. And there's a cave there. And this is where, if you are a middle school boy, you're going to love the next part of this story. So he comes to he sees the cave there, and he went in to relieve himself. He went to go to the bathroom. Which is kind of crazy if you think about the scene, right? Here he is with his, huge army. 3,000 people, right? They're traveling. They got all their animals, all the supplies. They're going along. Imagine if you're part of that crew and you got to go to the bathroom. You just hop off the animal you're riding or the carriage you're riding and get down. You find a spot, find a tree. Maybe if there's a tree, just go find some place, do it, and hurry up and catch back up. But when the king stops, everybody's got to stop. Oh, the whole 3,000 stop. Gets past the sheep. Oh, there's a cave here. Excuse me, guys, I just need to get down. He gets down. He walks up. Everybody knows what he's going to do. They're watching to make sure he's safe. But it's like, we're going to let him have his privacy because who doesn't want privacy in that moment? And so he goes in the cave. And this is a really important piece, even though it seems, in fact, I think this is the only time I'm aware of in the Bible that it talks about the whole relieving yourself, going to the bathroom. But it's an integral part of the story because of what we're told next by the narrator. The narrator says, oh, by the way, he goes in this cave, and David and his men are hiding way back in the cave. It's probably likely that they've been keeping an eye. They've heard Saul's, looking for him, and maybe have heard where they're at. And they see them. Everybody go hide. They find this cave. They go hide. A bunch of them go hide in this cave, way in the back. And after Saul and the guys, get past us, we'll regroup and we'll go the other way. Because David's not looking for a fight. He's trying to stay away from this whole thing. And so David and the guys, they're back there. Their eyes have already adjusted. They see the silhouette of Saul come in. They see him take off his outer coat, probably hike up his skirt, because they had skirts back then, right? And he doesn't tell us what he has to do to relieve himself, but I imagine he finds a little spot and squats down to relieve himself. And David and the guys see him. Saul's eyes haven't adjusted yet, so he's just kind of there, squats down to his business. And just think, when this happens, the impact it has to have on David and his guys, right? Because they have to think, what are the odds of that, right? What are the odds that the king's going to have to go to the bathroom at just this right moment? What's going to be the odds that he decides he has to go into a cave to do his business? He can't just find a tree or a rock, right? He's got to go into a cave. And that it will be the cave exactly where David and his guys are at. You have to think they're thinking to themselves, the stars are lining up, right? Or God must be smiling on us. The reality is this is best case scenario, right? Perfect situation, right? In fact, I want you to notice what next David's guys say to him, because that's all they're thinking about. They think, oh, finally, he's going to get rid of Saul. We're going to be victors. We're going to go back. David's going to become king. We're going to become important people in his kingdom, and we get to go home finally, right? Because they've all been out traveling for, some part of these 8 years together. And so the men say to David, today, David, I'm whispering, right? Today is the day that the Lord spoke of when he said, I will give your enemy into your hand. Which is interesting. We have no record of when this actually happened, but apparently David heard that, and that's what he passed along to guys that, hey, there's going to come this moment when God's going to come through. God's will is for me to be king. You anointed me a long time ago. God's way, apparently this is God's way, right? God's timing, it's right in our hands. I mean, this has to be God's will. This is one of those moments that when everything lines up that just seems so perfect, it can't be anything else. This can't be a coincidence. And the guys are all thinking it's going to be over. That this is the moment where finally this whole running and hiding is going to be over. So the guys are jazzed. They're whispering and they're all like, David, shh. And in that moment, it seems like David felt something else. I would describe it just as this way. It's a tension, maybe a hesitation. There's something that in David that just doesn't feel right. Even though everything as he sees it seems perfect, right? Here's my enemy. He comes into the cave that we're hiding in to go to the bathroom. He's in a very vulnerable spot at this moment. I mean, who could argue that this isn't God's will, that God hasn't laid it out? But David feels something else, something that didn't make any sense in light of the circumstance. Everything would be saying, green light, go kill him. This is the perfect time. All the guys are excited. And then the story tells us that David creeps up on Saul and quietly, I love the word stealthily, cuts off the corner of Saul's robe. Which he had to be really stealthily. I mean, why? You can imagine you're in a cave doing your business and somebody sneaks up on you. That's pretty impressive. And cuts the edge of your robe off. I mean, it's not like he's got some soothing music playing, right? He's in there, right? And the crazy thing is that somewhere between the back of the cave and King Saul's back, something changes for David. I mean, this is the perfect opportunity. And I think what changes for him is simply this. He comes to one of the moments and says, I can't. In fact, not just I can't, I won't. Which seems odd because it seems like God's laid everything out for him. It's put it all on a plate. I mean, how could you, the silver platter, I mean, everything you want. Enemy, vulnerable position, you got all your guys behind you. If he kills him and cuts off his head and comes out with Saul's head, the whole army's the 3,000 aren't gonna attack him. They're gonna go, oh no. All right, David's king now, right? And everybody's gonna go. And this is the time to finally become what he's been anointed to become. What he's been told, promised years ago that he was gonna become. In fact, the narrator says later David felt guilty that his conscience bothered him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He isn't bothered that he thought about killing him. What he bothers him is the fact that he actually went up and messed up his robe. That he disrespected Saul in that process. So you can imagine David sneaks up. Saul's doing his business, cuts off the edge, comes back to his guys, and they have to be, you may imagine the tension that there's now. I mean, the guys, they got to be like beyond, right? And they're like, shh, you got to be quiet because, I don't want Saul to find you there. And when David gets back, here's what he says to his men. May the Lord preserve me from doing such a thing to my master. Saul is the Lord's appointed king. He's the anointed one. I've been anointed, but Saul was anointed before me. God kept me from doing this. In fact, I shouldn't do anything. I shouldn't raise my hand against him because he is the Lord's appointed king. He's the anointed one. And the narrator tells us that David used these words to restrain, to persuade, to scold his men. Because they had to be like, they were ready to go, right? Because if David didn't want to do it, get his hands dirty, they were glad to get their hands dirty, right? And he's like, shh. And you have to imagine, this happened in a cave. He's kind of whispering to them. They're trying to pass along all the, you don't know how many of the, hundreds he has are in there, but there's probably a good group. And so he's, shh, right? And he's telling them, don't. He's the anointed. And so he doesn't let them attack Saul, which Saul apparently is really thrilled with. And Saul finishes, hike up his pants, but apparently pulls down his skirt, right? He leaves the cave and he goes on his way down the hill. Everybody's been standing. Everybody's been down there waiting for him, right? It's not like you want to keep watching, but you keep making sure things are safe, but you got to wait for the king. Other guys are probably running off to do their business, hoping they can get back in time. And finally, he's coming down. He gets back in the caravan. They're ready to go on. And David comes out of the cave and he shouts to Saul. And here's the words. He says, my master, my Lord and king. He's making this public statement about how he sees Saul, right? Not just, oh, you're the king, but he's making his own profession. My master and my Lord. And the author tells us Saul looks back at him, and David now falls face down, prostrate on the ground, in this position of submission to Saul. And then listen to what David says to Saul. He says, why? Why do you listen when people say David wants to harm you? Why do you keep listening to that stuff? You have seen something with your own eyes today. Now, Saul's just kind of catching up because, again, when David steps out, he's like, whoa, what's going on? And he begins to put the pieces together. David came out of the same cave I was just at, where I was doing my business in a really vulnerable spot, and things could have gone really bad. He says, listen, you've seen with your own eyes today. The Lord put you in my power. He gave you into my hand in the cave. So David's saying, yeah, this seemed like a God thing that God set this stuff up. In fact, some guys, Saul, listen, some of them said I should kill you. But I was merciful. I spared you. In fact, I said to my guys, I won't raise my hand against my master because he is the Lord's appointed king. He's the anointed one. And then he kind of tells Saul how close this came for him. He says, my father, remember, this is his father-in-law, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut the corner of your robe, but I didn't kill you. Right? Which had to be like a really chilling thing for Saul at this moment because, he was all, he was in there. Now he knows not only was he in there, he was like right in there, right? He was like really, really close. And I didn't hear him. I didn't see him. I didn't smell him. I didn't feel him, right? I didn't sense his presence. He's reminded again of how good David is at what he does and how close he was. And then David drops to him and says, listen, what I've been trying to tell you all this time, listen, now understand and know I'm not planning any evil. There's no rebellion against you. This has never been about me trying to take your spot, get your position. That's not been my goal in life. In fact, I did nothing wrong to you. I haven't sinned against you, but you're hunting to take my life. I don't understand this, he's saying to Saul. Listen, I haven't done anything to you. I'm not a threat to you, but you keep treating me like a threat. And so because you treat me like a threat, I become a threat, and it's not working like that. I keep running from you. You keep chasing me. You don't find me. There's a reason you don't find me. I'm not looking for a fight. May the Lord judge between us. And David pushes it a little bit here. And may he punish you for the wrong you've done to me. But I am not against you. I'm not going to harm you. And the narrator says that when David finishes saying these words, Saul asked him something. Is that your voice, David, my son? Sounds like he's got some eyesight problem, right? But he hears the voice. He thinks it's David, right? Is that you, David? Which seems obvious from all the stuff he said, right? But he said, and then he says, listen, he cries loudly. Saul is an interesting character. When you begin to read the stories about him, he's got up and down emotions. He's back and forth. He can flip on a switch. And then as Saul's crying to him, he says something so moving that if you've ever had somebody say words similar to this to you, you know are very moving words that they do something to you. He looks at David and he says, you are a better man than I am. You're a better person than I am. And that's normally a hard statement for somebody to make. And normally if somebody says that to you, it's because they've learned something really hard. But Saul says, I look at this situation, no, you really are a better guy than me, right? Fact is, you've been good to me, and all I've done is done wrong to you. And then Saul agrees with David. He says, listen, I know that the Lord handed me over to you. This seemed like a perfect setup. I mean, who would have thought I would have needed to use the restroom at this moment? Who would have thought I would have gone to that particular cave, the cave where you guys were all at? I mean, it's clear the Lord handed you over to me, but you didn't kill me. People, next slide. People don't normally let an enemy get away like that, do they? And Saul's beginning to have that conversation with himself that you and I sometimes have, right? we go, that's not normally how it works, is it? And we kind of have that discussion, right? This isn't how it normally works, is it? So he says, may the Lord reward you, David, because you were good to me today. You were really good. In fact, he says, I now know you will surely be king, and you will rule the kingdom of Israel, which is a huge statement because, oh, by the way, who's king at this moment? Saul is. And his hope is that his son Jonathan will become the next one, right? Because that's what kings want, is their sons to continue on, keep the legacy going. But he's admitting to now something that he's heard, that he suspected, that's come out, that David has been anointed a long time ago. And he says, now I see it's true. And I see why it's true. The reason why Samuel anointed you so long ago. Because there's something different about you, David. So Saul finishes this part by simply saying, listen, now I need you to swear to me by the Lord that you're not going to kill my descendants, that you're not going to wipe out my name from my father's family. You know, I want a commitment from you now, even though you told me I want you to swear by God, because we're going to agree on that you're not going to kill off my descendants, because that's how you took care of all the threats to your throne, is kill off the former's descendants. So the narrator says, David made the promise to Saul. And then Saul goes back home, and David and his men, they go after their hideout. Because even then, even though it seemed like they've gotten things straightened out, something isn't quite right yet for them. David feels that, let's say, as good as he just sounded, I can't trust him. I've had too much of an experience with him. And this is one of those moments when you think about that story. And again, the story's not about us, it's about David thousands of years ago. But it is one of those moments when you read it and you begin to think about how it does cross-section with our life. And a question I just want us to consider for just a moment is this. Maybe we all need to be better at listening. Listening not just to somebody else, but listening to kind of what's going on up here. To stop selling ourselves for a moment and just listen. Listen to the wiser voices around us, and maybe even the wiser voice that's in us. Because David had a lot of voices around him saying, do it, right? Shh, do it, right? Perfect moment. And David's like, I can't, I won't. And why doesn't David take advantage of the seemingly God-given opportunity? I think David's paused because he felt there was a tension there. Something in him didn't feel right, didn't set right with his own values, his own philosophy of how things ought to be done. He was convinced to do the right thing the right way, to not take matters into our hands. Because the reality is David chose not to use Saul's bad behavior as an excuse for his. Which, let's be honest, is a really hard thing to do, isn't it? Because when somebody does something to us, we figure we can do it back to them because they did it to us. So let's just do it back. In fact, we can pull a Bible verse out of that. If we're a person of faith, a Christian, right? Because we like to have verses to support what we want to do, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Since they did that to me, they want that done to them. It's in the Bible. But David didn't let Saul's really bad behavior, right, be an excuse for him to do what he felt was going to be really bad behavior. Because David knew that what he did in that moment, if he had taken Saul's life, that would be a story that would follow him the rest of his life. He'd have his grandchildren on his knees, and they'd be like, oh, dude, Grandpa, tell us that story about when great-grandpa was going to the bathroom and you cut his head off. We love that story, right? That's if he had a bunch of grandsons, right? Let's get back to the story. This isn't the only time something like this happens. For a little bit of time, we don't know how long later, it's just part of the story. Sometime later, the people of Ziph went to Saul and they said to him, hey, David's hiding up in this hill area, so you ought to come get him. So Saul goes down to this desert area with 3,000 elite soldiers, again, the 3,000 guys, and he's there to look for David. And we're told that he makes his camp, by the road, this big spot. I mean, if you got 3,000 people, you're going to take a big spot. David stays in the wilderness with his few hundred guys. And when David heard that Saul had followed him, he says, okay, let's do this. We're going to send some spies in. And let's find out for certain that this is Saul's group. This isn't somebody else, right? So the spies go. They come back and say, yeah, it's Saul. We've seen some people we know. We saw where Saul's at. He's there. So then David goes to the place where Saul's camped. And he goes there with just a handful of guys. And as they get there, they're spying on the big spot in this big encampment. And he sees where Saul and Abner is now the new David. He's now the commander of Saul's army. He's in charge of the bodyguards. He's the one that's supposed to be protecting Saul. He's risen up in ranks. And he sees where they're sleeping. And we're told that they're sleeping in the middle of the camp with all the army around them, which makes a whole lot of sense, right? You got 3,000 guys, put me in the middle of it, let them all protect me so nobody can get in and get me, right? There's no way, because how can they get through all those guys to get me? So then David is there with his guys. He sees all the layout, and he says, hey guys, I got a really dumb idea. Who's in with me, right? Who will go into the Saul's camp with me? Because again, it sounds like a really good idea, right? We're going to sneak in with this thousands of guys around us. We're going to go all the way to the middle, right? And it's not like they got a straight road. You're going to have to go around tents, and you have to be quiet, and there's guards, all that stuff. Who wants to go? And one guy, Abishai, answers, me, I'll go with you. Because what young guy doesn't want a dumb idea to go along with, right? So they head down into the camp. They sneak in, right? They get there. They find Saul, who's asleep in the middle of the camp, and he's got his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Apparently this was what you did. It makes a lot of sense, right? It's stuck, so if I wake up, I just grab it. It's handy. I don't have to go looking for it. It's just stuck in the ground. It's a perfect idea. And we're told that Abner and the army, the 3,000 guys were sleeping around Saul. So I'm sure Abner's like right next to Saul, just in case to be the last line of defense. And so, they're creeping around, they're sneaking up. Again, it tells you how good these guys are. They get all the way to where Saul and Abner are at. And Abishai, I want you to notice, he says something to David. He says, David, this is great. Today, God he's delivered your enemy over to you. He's given it into your hands again. This is great. Second shot that I get this right, David. And he goes, David, I know you were uncomfortable doing it last time, so let me pin Saul to the ground with my spear. You won't have blood in your hands. It won't be you'll be clean on this. You haven't done anything to the Lord's anointed. Let me do it, right? And listen, I'm really good. I only have to do it once. I don't need to strike him twice. It'll be clean, squished, done, right? To which David goes, don't kill Saul, right? Shh, you gotta be quiet, right? Don't kill Saul. And he goes back to the same line he had before. Who can raise a hand against the Lord's appointed king, the anointed, and still be innocent without guilt? David has this firm belief about the ones in charge. He was put there by God. In this case, he was. And that you don't mess with that. You honor that whole piece. In fact, he goes, as surely as the Lord lives, the Lord himself will punish Saul. He says, God's got this. Maybe Saul will die naturally. Or maybe he's going to get in a battle and be killed, which is, oh, by the way, what happens later. But then David makes that conscience-driven statement again when he says, but may the Lord keep me from harming, raising my hand against his appointed king, his anointed. So I have to imagine the guy that's with David is like, well, why did we come here then, right? I mean, why don't we just risk our lives sneaking through these thousands of guys to get to the spot, to just look at him breathe, snore, right? It's like, what's the whole reason of risking our lives if it's not has some pay off some reward? So David says to him, hey, take the spear and the water jug that are near Saul's head, and let's go. So they grab the spear and the water jug. They sneak back out. They get over to the other side of the hill. They stay on the top of the mountain far from Saul's camp. I don't know if they do it right away, or if they wait a little bit of time until sunrise. When everybody's getting up. But at some moment, David steps up on top of this hill way far away, so they're out of, danger. And he shouts to the army and to Abner, "Hey, wake up, sleepyheads, woo, 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 Won't you answer me, Abner? Hey, Abner. To which Abner, wakes up. Everybody jumps up when they hear the noise. Everybody jumps up, ready to fight. What's going on? Abner goes, "Who are you that calls on the king?" Right? I'm the tough guy. I'm the last line of defense. To which David, I love what David says, "Hey, aren't you the greatest man in Israel? Aren't you like you're the guy now. You're the guy in charge. You're the big protector. Isn't that true? You're the greatest guy because you're right next to the king. I got a question for you. Why didn't you guard your master, the king?" Because somebody came into camp to kill him. "Oh, Abner, you have not done well." Yeah, he's taunting him. Which again, David's, probably late 20s at this moment. He's still in that time of life when, anyways. "You're not done well, Abner. Oh, by the way, as surely as the Lord lives, you and your men should die." Because they should, because somebody got in to kill the king, could have killed the king, that's on them. "Because you haven't guarded your master, the Lord's appointed king, the anointed one. And oh, by the way, Abner, I want you to go look. I want you to look for the king's spear and his big water jug near his head." Which they're like looking and they notice no spear, no water jug. And Abner at that moment goes, "Oh, mama, I think is the right word." Because he knows somebody has been there. This guy's telling the truth. And the king's going to be really ticked off. Right? Because the king has every right. Then this is what you're hired for. You're hired to protect the king. You got 3,000 guys. How does somebody sneak in and do this, right? So the narrator tells us, as this conversation is going on, Saul wakes up, right? "What's going on? How come, who disturbs my sleep, right?" He sees David, but he can't really recognize him. But he recognizes the voice. "Is that you, David?" Right? "David, my son." Again, his son-in-law, right? To which David says, "Yes, it is my master and king." David's sticking with that, my master and king statement. And then David goes back to the lines again. Why are you chasing me, my master? What wrong have I done? What have I done to you that you keep chasing me, right? You chase me all over the place. I'm not a threat to you, but you keep trying to find me. To which Saul gets again to one of those spots where he's reflecting, he's thinking, and he says, "You're right, David. I've messed up. I've sinned." So come on back, David. Come on, Dad. Let's hug it out, buddy. Come on. My son, let's just hug it out, right? David's like, "I'm not sure I want to hug it out yet, but this is a good start, right?" But Saul recognizes what's happened because he knows his jug in there. He knows his spear in there. He knows Abner has messed up his job. So Saul says to David in front of everybody, "Listen, today you respected, you valued my life. So here's my deal, David. I'm not going to try to kill you. I'm not going to hurt you. And the reason is I've been very wrong. I've been mistaken. I've been foolish. Because you're right. You haven't been a threat to me. You're right that I've been chasing you for no reason." To which David softens at this moment. He says, "Okay, hey, here's your spear, king. Send one of your guys over to grab it for you, right? And I'll give it to them and you can have it back. And oh, by the way, king, the Lord rewards us for the things we do right and for our loyalty, our faithfulness to him." And David at this moment is thinking that because he's been faithful to God, that Saul is gonna back off this whole tracking him down. Because remember, Saul, the Lord handed you over to me again today. But again, I wouldn't harm you. I wouldn't harm the Lord's appointed king. I wouldn't harm the Lord's anointed. And as I respected and valued your life today, may the Lord also respect my life and save me from all my trouble. It's one of those crazy moments, right? And Saul, again, is softened, and he seems open to maybe getting this thing straight and right with them. And Saul shouts out to David. Somebody says, "May you be blessed, my son David. You will do great things and surely prevail." And that's the parting word. In fact, it's the last recorded words we have between Saul and David. Because David will go his way and Saul will go back home. Doesn't fix things, doesn't make things right. Just a reminder again about how complicated relationships can be, especially with people in really important positions, powerful people. And how sometimes when we get something in our heads, it stays there no matter how much evidence we see to the contrary. So as we wrap it up today, let me just ask you a question or two. Are we selling ourselves on a bad idea? Are you in one of those stages of life that Timothy prayed about earlier, where you're selling yourself on a bad idea? You know it's a bad idea. People have told you it's a bad idea, but still, it's an opportunity, right? It seems like everything's falling in place, and it's like this is the right thing to do. And in the process, are we ignoring our consciences and other people's wise advice? Because I'm convinced rarely do we make bad decisions without some voices telling us, don't be a knucklehead. Whether it's actually somebody coming up and saying that you've told the idea and they're going, that's a really dumb idea, that's a bad idea. Or whether it's just one of those voices inside our head. But we're all salesmen. And we can sell ourselves some bad ideas pretty easily. And I just want to remind you, at least one of my takeaways in looking back on the life of David, and it's simply this, that every decision has a chance to be a life decision. And that's a hard truth because I think while we understand it, it's hard to live that out. Because we don't want to think every little decision we make really has that big of an impact, but they do. Every decision has the chance to be a life decision, one that follows us for the rest of our lives. I was at some meetings earlier this week, and we had donuts. I was keeping myself to one donut a day. Somebody else that was at these meetings was eating multiple donuts. And their excuse is one I understand, because they said, I ran 4 miles this morning, which I'm like, good for you. So that's that's our excuse, right? Because I did this, now I get this, right? Even though he's running to lose weight, you understand the whole idea, right? But it's those little decisions, right? And they build habits that can, last us our whole life. And David had at least, 2 of the ones we read today. There's been more, but just those 2 we looked at today that were really a chance to be life decisions. When Saul falls into his hands, and what does he do? Does he take advantage of the opportunity? That seems like a clear, God's put him here opportunity. Or does he make the decision based on something that's deeper inside of him? Not just of an opportunity, but of a core value, of a commitment, of a belief, of a trust. That Saul was God's person, even though Saul was occupying the spot that David was supposed to occupy. And we wrap up the series. Let me ask you just one more question. What if it really is about trust? Because for David not to take advantage of those situations, he risked losing his men. He risked putting them at more risk. But what if this really is about trust? Because David had a trust in God that God had gotten this right in the first spot. That Saul was his anointed, even though God himself had said, you're done, you're not going to continue forever in this, it's in with you, I got somebody else. That it was a trust that God's will would happen in God's way, would happen in God's time. What would it look like to trust that if God is going to do something, he will? Because isn't that the real issue as we think about faith, having that kind of trust that says, I'm going to trust in the same God. Same God that David prayed to, the same God that David believed in, the same God that led David to that conclusion, right? But to be able to trust God is going to do the thing that he told you going to do, and he's going to do it. He doesn't need our help in creating those moments. You know, as I've been telling you the last few weeks, trusting God is a decision, not a feeling. Especially in a moment when it seems like a perfect opportunity not to. Something to think about today.